Manson was behind some of the most horrific murders of the 1960s. Murders some speculate were brought on by an unlikely friendship with the kings of surf pop. By 1968, the Beach Boys were giving off less than good vibrations. Fame, money, and drug use had taken a toll on the seemingly wholesome quintet. In April, Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson befriended a small, wiry drifter and aspiring musician named Charles Manson.
Music was a very big part of his life. He also was a murderer, of course, but he may not have been a murderer if he had been accepted into the rock music industry.
Manson and his followers moved in with Wilson. He gave them food, clothes, use of his cars, and money. Wilson also introduced him to Beach Boys producer Terry Melcher, who allegedly promised Manson a record deal. In September, the Beach Boys recorded a song of Manson's they retitled Never Learn Not to Love, but Manson wasn't happy with the results.
They changed a lot of the lyrics around, which really, really upset Charlie.
Soon after, Wilson and Melcher noticed a frightening change in Manson. There were rumors he had killed a local drug dealer, and when Manson left a bullet with a warning on Wilson's doorstep, Wilson and Melcher tried to sever their ties with the would-be musician.
That's one of the reasons why Dennis Wilson cleared out of his own house. I think he was afraid of Charlie.
The Manson family were then charged with a series of violent murders at the former home of Beach Boys producer Terry Melcher. And according to Manson family member Susan Atkins, Manson had picked the house to instill fear in Melcher for breaking his word about the record contract. Charged that the teenagers tried to kill themselves because subliminal messages in a Judas Priest song. Charged that the teenagers tried to kill themselves because subliminal messages in a Judas Priest. Charged that the teenagers. By December of 1964, at the height of the Beach Boys' popularity, drug use, band tensions, and the pressures of stardom were wearing Brian Wilson down. One night on a flight to Houston, Wilson finally snapped. 5 minutes after takeoff, he began screaming and stumbling around the plane. His bandmates were terrified. Scars of an abusive childhood.
As time went on, he became more and more.
Believing the answer to life was death.
We thought, oh, this will get thrown out because of the We thought, oh, this will get thrown out because of the
horrible, I guess, to the point where he could no longer protect himself at all.
By December of 1964, at the height of the Beach Boys' popularity, drug use, band charged that the teenagers tried to kill them. Brian Wilson had a unique gift for harmony, melody, and arrangement, but he also bore the mental scars of an abusive childhood.
As time went on, he became more and more vulnerable, I guess, to the point where he could no longer protect himself at all.
By By December of 1964, at the height of the Beach Boys' popularity, drug use, band tensions, and the pressures of stardom were wearing Brian Wilson down. One night on a flight to Houston, Wilson finally snapped. 5 minutes after takeoff, he began screaming and stumbling around the plane. His bandmates were terrified. Wilson was hysterical for the entire flight. When they landed, Wilson announced he would no longer tour with the group. At first, the self-imposed studio exile seemed a healthy step. While the rest of the band continued to tour, Wilson began writing the group's classic 1966 album, Pet Sounds. But Wilson's condition worsened, and he started behaving erratically. He built a giant sandbox around his grand piano and experimented freely with LSD. The outside world eventually became too much for Brian Wilson, and he spent the better part of 3 years in bed, a time immortalized by Canadian pop stars Bare Naked Ladies in their song, Brian Wilson.
It's always shocking to find out that music that is so life-embracing and so beautiful can come from someone who is so damaged by such horrible things in their lives.
By 1977, Brian Wilson was well enough to rejoin the Beach Boys on stage, but he would still spend the next 2 decades in and out of various kinds of controversial therapy.